Hello everyone, welcome to Eye on Africa. Here are your headlines on this Thursday. He's not running. Ivorian President Alassane Ouattara says he will not be running for a third term, putting an end to months of speculation. He says he wants to transfer power to the younger generation. A landmark study just released finds tropical forests around the world, including in Africa, are losing their ability to absorb carbon dioxide, and it's happening in forests that are not exposed to human activity, like deforestation. And how closing down one mine in Sierra Leone has left nearby residents scrambling to find a way to make a living. We'll have that story coming up. Ivorian President Alassane Ouattara is not running for re-election. He made the announcement in a speech to deputies and senators in the capital of Yamoussoukro. The decision ends months of speculation that he would try to run for a third term. Maud Julien has the story.
Putting an end to months of speculation that he might try for another term, Ivory Coast's president made his intentions clear.
I wish to solemnly announce that I have decided not to be a candidate in the presidential election. I also want to ensure the conditions for a transfer of power from a democratically elected president to another, for the first time in the history of our country.
Alassane Ouattara will stand by his 2017 promise not to run for re-election, and many Ivorians say they're pleased with his decision.
This
type of announcement is good for our democracy and shows he is a real leader.
Thank God there will be peace in Ivory Coast. The Ivorians won't be killing each other again in the 2020 election.
Political tension is still rife in the country, a year and a half after local elections that were marred by fraud and violence. Guillaume Soro, who was once the leader of a pro-Ouattara rebellion, is the only person who announced he would be a candidate for the presidency so far. He's wanted by the Ivorian justice for allegedly plotting a coup and currently lives in exile. Henri Conan-Bédier, who was head of state until 1999 and is nearly 86 years old, has not ruled out running again. Some speculate Laurent Gbagbo could be a candidate, but the former president's fate is in the hands of the International Criminal Court. He was acquitted last year for crimes against humanity, but remains in Europe pending an appeal by the prosecution.
The coronavirus outbreak continues to spread. South Africa reported its first case on Thursday. The patient is a 38-year-old man who visited Italy with his wife. The couple have 2 children, and the family was part of a group of 10 people who returned from a trip to Italy on Sunday. Both the patient and the doctor who first treated him are in self-isolation in the eastern province of KwaZulu-Natal. Meanwhile, President Cyril Ramaphosa has urged South Africans not to panic and to get immediate medical help if they show coronavirus symptoms. However, he also warned the outbreak will turn into a national crisis and that the impact on the country's economy will be, quote, huge. The United States has extended sanctions against top leaders in Zimbabwe. The reason? Alleged actions, quote, to undermine democratic processes or institutions. Donald Trump wrote to Congress on Wednesday saying restrictions would not be removed until Emerson Mnangagwa's administration implements political reforms. In the memo, Trump accused the Zimbabwean government of persecuting critics and said security forces in the country carried extrajudicial killings, rapes, and abductions. A government spokesperson called the decision to extend sanctions baffling. Next, you've probably read about this piece of news in the past 24 hours. A landmark study published in the Nature journal and covered by several news outlets like the Washington Post. Scientists have found that tropical rainforests around the world, including in Africa and the Amazon, are losing their ability to absorb carbon dioxide, down 1/3 since the 1990s. The alarming data suggests that by 2050, forests in Africa will be emitting more CO2 than they absorb, accelerating the effects of climate change. Well, a little earlier, I spoke to Wannes Hubo, one of the main authors of this study and a researcher at the Museum for Central Africa just outside of Brussels. He explained why these changes are occurring.
Yeah, so we are actually reporting on the more invisible effects of climate change. And the reason why they're happening, it's twofold. First of all, there has been a positive effect of CO2 fertilization in the past, but this positive effect of CO2 fertilization is waning. So before the 1990s, trees were actually taking advantage from the excess CO2 in the air, which is like food for the trees. But now this fertilization effect is being more and more countered by the negative effects of temperature and drought on the productivity of trees. So this productivity of trees is going down. And then secondly, and more importantly, the forests are now actually paying the bill for the increased productivity of the trees in the 1990s. So forests have actually a natural cycle of productivity, periods of productivity, followed by periods of mortality, tree death. And we have blown the cycle up to unknown proportions. And the increased productivity of the 1990s is now actually resulting in accelerated death of the trees. And this is called an internal feedback mechanism. And this is why we see this increased mortality and this waning tropical forest carbon sink in intact tropical forests.
Most countries, most governments nowadays go by the findings of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the IPCC, who say that rainforests around the world will continue to absorb carbon dioxide for many decades to come. But your findings actually contradict those. Does that mean that the IPCC have to review their temperature models?
Well, those models are actually changing all the time. They are being improved all the time. And yes, I think our study is ringing an alarm bell somewhere that something is missing in the models probably. I think we see that the productivity of the trees, the growth of the trees, is being modeled pretty well by those models. However, the mortality of the trees, the death of the trees, and the losses of carbon into the atmosphere, that is something that is really difficult to predict, and especially this internal feedback mechanism between past productivity and mortality is something that is probably not captured well yet in those models. So yes, I think they will have to take into account their study and try to change and improve their models.
Very briefly, Mr. Hubo, you and your colleagues have also come to the conclusion that African forests are actually more resilient than forests in the Amazon, for example. Can you explain very quickly why is that?
Yeah, that's the positive side of our story. So the positive side of our story is that African tropical forests are actually doing better than Amazonian forests. While their sink is declining, it is declining less fast than in Amazonia because African forests are more resilient. And they are more resilient because they are on average a bit cooler than the Amazonian forests, and they receive less precipitation. They are more temperate. And actually, they have a slower dynamics, so they have a slower turnover. They are just slower forests, and they respond less fast or more slowly to this climate change and to the productivities in the past. So there's a response of tropical forests of African tropical forests to past increases in productivity, resulting in mortality, is less pronounced in Africa than in the Amazon. So actually, African forests are playing a more important role in the carbon balance now than has ever been acknowledged. And their importance will probably increase only in the future as the Amazon sink will continue to rapidly decline and even eventually become a source.
Finally, last October, Sierra Leone's largest iron ore mine laid off almost all of its workers because of a legal dispute with the government. 1,700 employees were fired. That's 5% of the population of Lunsar, the nearest town. That has left locals struggling to get by without the industry on which they most depended. Nicolas Germain has the story.
The Marampa mine is Sierra Leone's largest iron ore mine. It closed last October because of a legal dispute between the government and company SL Mining. The authorities want the firm to pay higher royalties and has revoked its licenses. The dispute has left 1,700 workers without a job, and the town of Lunsar is suffering badly.
There is nothing else in Lunsar to do without the mines. So the mines was the source of life. Buildings are going to be dilapidated. People are going to move out. So the entire township of Lunsar will become, yet again, another ghost town. So as someone from Lunsar, this hurts.
The entire local economy is collapsing. Some residents are on the run from debt collectors. This man has a grocery store, but nowadays there are no customers and his products are expiring.
Here, some of the vegetables, cans and everything, that was in here. And as a matter of fact, about 2-3 days ago, we have to discredit most of them because they've expired. So this is the damages.
Locals wait in vain. So far, Sierra Leone's government has ignored international court orders for it to reinstate the license of SL Mining. The firm rejects the government's accusations that it is not paying what it owed.
That does it for this edition of Eye on Africa. Thank you for watching. The news continues on France 24 right after this.
As Japan prepares for the 2020 Olympics and welcomes its 126th emperor and the era of beautiful harmony, we've come to Tokyo to check out its cultural scene. Join us from the world's biggest city as we meet some of its most exciting artists.
Encore, presented by Eve Jackson on France 24 and France24.com.